Well, I think workers face a lot of challenges in the current environment, perhaps the biggest being structural displacement, right? So AI and automation are reshaping work really faster than training systems and education can adapt. And so lots of people, I think, are in theory are employable, but they have real difficulty in getting the skills needed to change, what's happening in terms of the most vulnerable industries. And those vulnerable industries cut across a wide swath of things. There's definitely asymmetry, but it's everything from customer service and sales to things like accounting and finance and transportation and other areas. And so I think there are a lot of risks to workers, but I think this idea of an increasing amount of displacement is going to grow because of automation and AI.
And what are some of the solutions that you're seeing in the current marketplace or the labor force to help get those workers skilled to the right for the right jobs?
Well, part of the problem with the education and training system, sort of writ large, is that it's really not designed for people who are going through that displacement, right? And so the learning system is largely still, even today, designed mostly around traditional age learners. And so thinking about the ways in which we can sort of change that and better meet them where they are through things like modular learning or, sort of more flexible or easier pacing, being able to fund education and training in ways that meet, incumbent workers' needs, et cetera, I think is really important. And so, I've long joked that lifelong learning is sounds more like a sentence to to workers than it sounds like something they want to do. But the reality is that lifelong learning is really a structural necessity now for a growing number of workers, and it's not just in certain fields; it's really cutting across a growing number of fields.
I totally agree with you. This incumbent worker is the worker that is available to employers, and it's still trying to figure out how to connect those workers with those skills. Is there a role for higher education in that?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think that higher education has obviously long played a role as the primary driver or the engine, if you will, of skills development and training. Higher ed has often said that it trains people both for work and for life, and I think that's continues to be true. The challenge, I think, in the current environment is that credentials, whether they're degrees or non-degrees, things like certificates, certifications, et cetera, are really hard for people to understand. I think it's confusing for learner workers. I think it's confusing for employers, and I think policymakers are trying to figure out what to do about it. And so I think higher education needs to sort of better shift its focus towards helping people understand what they can do with whatever the credential is that they are getting. And so making the learning outcomes clearer, making them more meaningful, making sure that these credentials really are leading to credible pathways of opportunity, ultimately to economic prosperity and well-being, I think is really important. But I do think that higher ed's got a lot of transformation, self-transformation to do. I think some of it will be forced to do by policymakers, but I think a lot of it's going to have to do or face real sort of market challenges.
Yeah, I think that idea of the aircraft carrier and how long it takes to turn it, and
Right.
when you have a very established system, it's really hard to, and so many different arms of it actually. So not every institution is the same, and I think trying to get them all on the same page is probably very challenging.
I mean, one of the issues I've used this analogy recently that higher ed is sort of like the frogs in the boiling water, right? Like higher ed doesn't fully understand the risks that it's facing, at least in some cases, because some institutions are doing quite well. It's worth noting that enrollment continues to increase in higher education, and so there's this real sort of paradox, I think, for the higher ed institutions and therefore for consumers, the learner workers, about what the role of higher ed is. And I think higher ed's got to respond to that by being clearer about what it does and doesn't offer to those learner workers on the pathway to increasing wages, to family sustaining wages and overall security, and also on pathways to better jobs and better opportunities going forward.
Are you optimistic that we are headed in the right direction?
I think I am moderately optimistic in the sense that I think that we are getting to the point of no return in terms of being able to force the change that's necessary. And in that sense, I do think it's a time to be, somewhat optimistic. The challenge, I think, is, to go back to your analogy of the aircraft carrier, it's a complex, large system to change. And it takes time and resources in order to be able to make those changes. And I think there's a real collision between the speed and pace of the automation and the AI and the disruptions taking place and what they are able to do given the limited time and resources they have to do it. Some institutions are going to be more successful than others, and I think at the end, higher education will be better off because of it. But there will be disruption. There will be winners and losers. And I think we've got to just accept that that's a part of the way that change happens. Innovation, in this case, large scale innovation in the way that people learn and apply themselves when it comes to working is really upon us. And I think the system of higher ed is going to have to transform itself.
That brings to mind one more question, which is what role can employers play in signaling to higher education what they need and how they might work together to achieve that?
Okay, I think this is a really important point that's worth underscoring here, which is employers themselves have to be clear about what they do need and what they do expect of the learning system. Employers have been very good at saying that they aren't getting what they need. What they've been less clear about is what they do need, right? And so they say, well, that's not it, or that's not it. Well, what is it? Because in many cases, employers say that they need a combination of both better generalizable skills, right? Critical thinking, problem solving, interpersonal communication, all of these things that I think we understand higher education has long provided, but also increasingly technical and specific skills that allow them to do jobs that are, more and more focused on specific tasks that you've got to be really proficient at. And so being clear both about what the generalizable and what the more applied skills, knowledges, and experiences are, I think is going to be really important for employers to bring forward in the coming years.